Hey, what's up everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I will be presenting a new Material Series episode, and this time I will be showing you how to set up a realistic looking snow shader. And if you have not done so, please make sure you are subscribed to my channel and also be sure to have the notifications enabled. I cannot show it on my channel, but if I go to Solid Angle for instance, you can see this notification bell and make sure it is on, like this is off, and make sure it's on, and then you get always a post notification if I upload a new tutorial or if I post a message on the community on YouTube. So be sure to enable that and let's jump right into it. So this is the render I have posted and I tested it out. So this is kind of what we will be recreating. You can see you can see the detail here. It's more like a frosty compressed snowball or frost on a in the fridge or something. It's not really like soft and fluffy snow. But what I wanted to show you is how to set this up, and you can see the nice subsurface scattering working around the edges and especially on thinner parts. Also, I have a few references here. As you can see, this is now a nice and fluffy snow shader. A snowball. It's pretty similar, but you can see that there are these flakes on top, and with a simple shader, it's hard to achieve this kind of effect. But you can see the subsurface scattering is pretty close to this, and even the color, like the blue tint, it's working pretty similar to there. And then we have a more bluer one, and you can see the nice glints everywhere, which I'm getting on here as well, like these pings of spec. And this is more a compressed one and diffuse lighting, but you can see the scattering effect, how the light transmits through the surface here. So let's jump into Maya and set things up. So currently what we have is a gray sphere. Let's just dock this guy down here and move this over and change this to render cam. Save. I moved to I'm saving as MB currently just because of the speed. Yeah, so if I would use MA files, it takes a lot longer to save, and now I can just press Ctrl S and it's saving almost instantly. Right, so let's just start the render and see what we get. So that's what it is. It's pretty small for now, so I guess I will render the full res, which is 1K, and then I will be using regions to get faster feedback like this. Okay, so the first thing what I want to do is create a surface normal or displacement, right? And to do that, I need to create some procedural which helps me create this nice bumpy or like snowy effect, right? Because snow has different layers. As you can see, there's this overall shape, and then there's smaller frequency noise, and then there's really fine frequency noise as well. So here's a good example. You can see the overall shape, and then you can see on here the smaller bumps, and then you have the high frequency stuff. And I'll be trying to recreate that, and I did kind of the same here. So you have a bigger bump, a smaller bump, and then the high frequency stuff. And this should work with all shaders, which are pretty simple, and I'm not sure how good it will hold up in simulations and stuff like that, but for background renders or like even, well, you can see how it holds up. It's actually pretty good. So how I did it, I created just a simple AI noise like this. Let's call this AI noise low frequency like this, and make sure this is on depends how your UVs are, but for this I think they are not as good, so I'm using object or world. It doesn't matter. If you use world and it's moving, then it will slide through, so be sure to have object or pref. And before we connect this to the displacement stuff, I'll just want to connect it to the base color and hit render. So this is what we currently have, and I want to first create the low frequency stuff. So to get this working, obviously we will be changing the scale, maybe try 0.1. Okay, you can see that there is now bigger things happening, and if I go to isolate, it's just a bit nicer to render. There we go. What did I do now? Deselect, there we go. Okay, just one more check if I actually have the save render frames. I do. Okay, so this is the current noise level. I think we can go a bit higher actually, or just reduce it a bit more. Let's try 0.5. Okay, so this would be now my low frequency noise, and you can see it's currently here. I just want to offset it a bit just to get a different result. Not sure, just something where you can see some bumps happening here. Okay, so this is the low frequency for now, and what I want to do now, I just connect it up to a displacement shader first. So creating a displacement, deleting this shading engine, and connecting the red channel to the displacement and displacement to the displacement there, and selecting the shape. So I'm just clicking in the render view to select the shape node, go up here, Arnold, checking if I have subdivisions. Currently not, so I first need to see if I can actually subdivide it. So let's just start the render and let's see what we get. And if I go to basic, it's just a simple representation, and you can see something is happening. It seems to get a lot bigger. If I go to wireframe, this is what we have, and it is pretty dense already. Let's just see if I can actually subdivide it. It's now one subdivision. Yeah, so that is subdivided one more time, which is pretty dense now. And because we have a high frequency, we can't do that, or we can just use the bump mode instead. But for now, let's just really do the displacement. So both are now on one subdivision with this model, which is pretty dense. Okay, let's head over to basic, stop the render, and because we have a noise map which ranges from 0 to 1, we need to make sure our 0 value is 0.5, so values go up and down of the surface. So let's do 0.5, and for now just disable auto bump. Now let's render again, updating. So now it's subdividing the mesh. It takes a bit, and there we go. So we can hardly see any big breakup in the geometry, so I think it's all connected right. So let's just increase the displacement effect. Let's go a bit crazy. I think I need to update again. Displacement is a bit buggy with the IPR. Doesn't always update. Okay, and now you can see that it's actually really bulgy now, and it's not round anymore. You can see what's happening here. Like, this is totally thick now. This is really thin. It's all kind of broken now. So I think the noise is a bit too low. Let's just try 0.1. Yeah, let's just go with 0.1. And just for now, just that we have faster iterations, I just disable the subdivisions on both shapes, just a second, and then for the bigger render we will re-enable them. Okay, so now we can see with a higher frequency, we can see it's definitely subdividing it and breaking it. So I guess the height is now too much, so let's bring it down to maybe half of that, so 1.5, and re-render. Okay, I kind of like this. Yeah, this is actually pretty good. So this is now the really low subdivision displacement. So this defines kind of the shape. Obviously you can model that if you have the capacity to do so, but I'm a lazy guy, so I like to mostly do it with procedurals. So Control D on the noise, let's call this mid frequency, and like so. And now we need to combine them somehow. So the easiest way is to use a mix shader. I think it was intended to mix shaders actually, but it also works pretty good with floats or like texture or procedural. So let's do that. Mix shader, let's just call this AI mix, and then low and mid, and the mid goes in 2 and the low goes in shader 1. The red channel goes to displacement. So this is now the setup. So we've got 2 maps stacked up together now. And for this, let's change the frequency to maybe, let's try 1. Let's see what we get with 1. And render. Okay, so this is actually way too high frequency already. And the noise is also, like the value, the mix is too much on the mid value. So we need to, I guess, go 0.1 maybe. Just hit the play button. Let's see if we can see an update. Yeah. So now you can see that you get the big frequency, and then you get a bit smaller detail, which is pretty nice. So, but it's too big, I guess. So let's try maybe 0.5. Let's see what we get. Yes, and this is now pretty uniform. We can try to add a few more details with if you increase the octaves to 2, and it definitely adds a lot more detail. But I still think it's a bit too small. So let's maybe try 0.25. Okay, so now we get these dents here and there, which is pretty cool. I did not save the snapshot, but I think you can see that you get these little dents, and you also get the bigger ones. So now let's play around with the mix a bit, just to get it working as we want it to. Okay, you get the big shapes and you get the smaller ones, which is actually pretty cool. I still think that the low frequency can be a bit stronger. So to do so, what you can do, you can just increase the values in here, which should also have the same effect. So this is now on 1.5, and you can see it got bigger, which is nice. It's a bit more, it's a bit breaking the effect a bit more, the silhouette of the snowball, or shadow ball in this case. And you can see it's pretty close to the reference here actually. Let's see this, and this is also pretty dented up. Like you can see, we almost have this detail now. And now the last thing is, depending how much detail you want to add, let's add another one, which is high frequency. Alrighty, and let's duplicate, Control V this guy as well, and call this one mid-high. And so the thing is now the out color of the mix low mid goes into shader 1, and the out for high frequency goes into shader 2, and the red channel this time goes into displacement. And it's still live, and I keep saving all the time because sometimes it just crashes when you play around with displacement maps like that. So the high frequency, let's try maybe a value of 2. Okay, see what we get here. Okay, this is interesting. So you can see that I'm not sure if the subdivision is enough to represent this detail. So let's just check out if I play around with the mix a bit. Okay, so we get the breakup, and then we get the middle breakup, and then we get the high frequency stuff. And you can see I didn't touch a shader, or like we did not render a beauty render. Now I'm still working in the basic mode, and this is how you would approach your stuff. Start really with the basics, so you get fast iterations, and in the end work on the good with the high render settings and the shaders and all that stuff. Okay, so let's go a bit higher here. Okay, this is kind of neat. You can see that the geometry is now kind of at its limits. It's not doing much anymore. It's like we definitely need to subdivide the mesh more. You can see the wireframe. It's, yeah, because it's also triangulated, it's not really working as expected, I guess. So let's try to subdivide it, and if this does not work, we can try to use a bump instead. Remember that I disabled the auto bump here, because if you enable this here, you get a pretty different result. Or not. Is it a bit different? I think it's more detailed, which is actually pretty cool. Let's just toggle this. Play. Yeah, so it adds more detail to this, which is a pretty cool effect. But I still think we need to add a bit more subdivisions. I know it's pretty high already, but let's just see if I enable this. Let's just see what we get now. Takes a while to subdivide. And I think we got a bit more detail. You can see these dots here and there. And what I forgot to do is for this high frequency, let's just add a few more detail steps. Let's try 8 here, and we can actually go with the mid on 4 as well, which should change also quite a bit then. So let's just update this. Update full scene. Yeah, so you can see what happened now. Because I added the way more octaves to my noise map, you can see we got all this detail now, which looks pretty cool. And you can see it's getting thicker. These seams here are a bit unfortunate. It's because of the model. It's not really modeled as nice. It doesn't have really good edge loops, so this is why it's happening. But I think overall this works already pretty nice. So let's jump over to the shaded version and see what it looks like here. Okay, remember this is just the simple gray shader with a high roughness, I think. Yeah, pretty high. So you can see already that you get these nice glints now, these pings everywhere. So this is kind of the effect which you see here, like perfectly angled little glass planes which reflect the sunlight. And this is kind of what's happening here as well. And if you want to get this detail, obviously you need to kind of model those little snowflakes or have a procedural which create them and stuff like that. Alrighty, okay, so this is what we got, the bottom and the top. So first let's disable the subdivision and the displacement. Okay, let's stop this guy, render globals, diagnostics, disable bump and display subdivision and displacement. So now we will go into tweaking the shader. It's easier to do that for now just because you want to have the proper scale and all that stuff. Alright, so let's just render this region here and bring in the detail which we want. So we want to have a scattering shader because light is being scattered through snow. But you can see it pretty nicely here. The sun hits this side and then it lights up on the other side. Pretty nice. And obviously there's a lot of bounce happening as well. So we sort all that out. So because a shader is diffuse or subsurface, we completely disable the diffuse color, and for now also the specs. And then we introduce subsurface and enable this guy. And because we can, let's just change the mode to random walk, which adds more detail to thin areas. And already now you can see the effects of scattering happening if we get a clean render. So there we go. You can see this looks already very promising. It's very noisy, I agree, but you can see how it's being scattered, how you get scattering in these thinner parts and all that, which is pretty neat. So let's just play around with the scale. And first let's also change the radius. So for now I'll just change it to red. And this now tells us where scattering happens the most. I'm just rendering this region here, and you can see the effect. It's pretty similar already to this. Obviously it's red and not blue, but now let's tweak the scale. If I bring down the scale to maybe 0.2, you can see that it's getting thinner, like the light does not spread into the surface as much. But obviously for snow we want to have a higher number. So let's first change this to a teal color and maybe desaturate it, and let's go a bit more into the blue. And then desaturate, I guess, a bit more. Okay, so this is now our color for the transmission. And let's bring up the scale maybe to 2. Okay, so this I guess was too much. And snow is not perfectly white. I think the whitest material on Earth is actually snow, and I think it's 90% white. If I might be wrong, but that's what I think, what I remember. So this is now 90% white, and let's just add a tinge of blue, really subtle, maybe 0.1. Okay, so this is now what we currently have. And it's not really what I would expect. So we need to work on the scale for sure. Let's just render this guy again. And let's also increase our samples for the scattering. Currently on 1, so let's go up to 3. And also let's, while we edit, introduce a few more bounces. So let's add 3 diffuse bounces. And for now the spec is, we can ignore the spec, I think, because it's currently anyways non-specular. And you can see now it's pretty white, but you can see the effect, so that's pretty awesome. So let's go down to 1 to the default and wait until it resolves. Okay, and you can see the effect gets a bit stronger now. And also let's try to make it a bit darker, and then you see even more how it's being more translucent, I guess. Okay, so let's try to work with the anisotropy. So the higher you increase the anisotropy, the thin parts look, I guess. It's like a bias towards the thin side. And if you go into the other direction, you get a thicker result. Okay, so let's just render the whole image for now. And you can see it's definitely, the blue is too teal. We need to change the color a bit. But overall, I'm pretty happy. In the shadow sides, you get the nice blue effect and the nice scattering. Actually, it's kind of an Arctic blue, which you would see on the poles. So if you want to go for that, that's totally fine. But I think I will desaturate it a bit and change the hue a bit to a more in the purple side. Okay, but this is for sure working. So what I said, like, reduce the saturation and change the blue to a bit like this maybe. Yeah, this is actually pretty cool. So this is more like now blue purplish, which looks, I think, a lot better. Right, so this is now the translucency with just these settings here, nothing special. So now let's just store this guy, the snapshot, and move this a bit higher. So what I like to do, which might not be 100% physical, but I want to introduce 2 lobes of spec. So one will be the overall sheen of the ice or of the snow, which is like the overall reflection, which is a bit broad and rough. And then I want to introduce this really shiny, glinty effect. So I will have a coat and a regular specular. So let's introduce spec again, and you can see now it looks like almost melted ice with the nice subsurface effect on top. So this would now be the molten ice or whatever. So obviously we don't want to go for this effect. So let's introduce roughness to this guy. So let's just check the spec lobe. spec direct, and introduce roughness. And obviously, because it's water, we want to use water as a preset, which just changes the IOR to 0.3. Okay, so now I just want to go for kind of this rough. I think when we have the displacement back on, this will look pretty cool. And obviously when we have that enabled, I need to, I guess, readjust those values. And then I want to add the code, bring that in. And because we're in a spec, we don't see that right now. So let's go to the spec code direct, change this again to water or ice. Ice has even lower. Interesting. And I would never go below 0.05. So I think 0.1 is pretty good. We can try to go to here, but I think let's just for now stop at 0.1. And this would now be my two codes. And if I check the beauty, it's hard to see it actually, but there is obviously, because it's white, you should be able to see this. There you go. I just disabled the subsurface scattering for a bit, and you can see now this effect we get. It's kind of like a metal now, but because it's a very low IOR, it might just work. So let's stop the render. Save the scene and introduce subdivision and displacement. And start again. So this is now with the displacement map enabled, and you can already see that we get these little glints of ice, which looks pretty cool, I must say. And it's very high frequency. I think it's because the auto bump is enabled. And but I still want. We still need to do something, I think, about the bump or the displacement in general. I think it looks a bit too compressed, and as I said, this stuff is unfortunate. It's because of the model, and it's extruding along these edges or displacing, and then it breaks. So just ignore that. But you can see the overall effect is pretty neat. So if I go to my code direct, you can see this actually. It's looking pretty cool already. And let's check the spec direct. And I guess this might be a bit too rough now. So let's just render this region here and reduce this a bit. Let's just go a bit lower. It's because there's surface roughness to it now. We don't need a high roughness as 0.6. So this is pretty cool, I think. So let's just check the code now together. Yeah, it's hard to see. Let's just dial down the exposure, and now you can see how it's looking. And I think I need to increase the overall mid frequency noise a bit, because I like this detail which we get here, and I think it's from the mid level. So to do that, I just stop the render and let's mix this up more. So now if I increase the mix here, we get more of the mid. Let's try 0.3 and start the render again. Save, there we go. Let's just hit play. So now it should subdivide, and then we should see more detail on the surface here. And we see more bumps happening, which is pretty cool. Right, so for the frequency, for the high one, I think it's a bit too much. So let's just go down maybe to 1.5. And this is obviously at some point it's preference, how you think it looks good. But these are the 3 steps I did to set up the final render for this here. So you can see it's a bit more frosty. You can see it has a higher bump map or a higher displacement here. But overall it's working. And I'm pretty sure this one I rendered without auto bump. So that's something you might consider as well, to rather subdivide your mesh more and then use the real displacement instead of the auto bump stuff. So now obviously what you can do now is, if you change your depth for the scattering and all that kind of stuff to get the look you want to achieve for your render, I guess. So what I still want to do, I just want to reduce the whiteness. I still think because the sun I'm using in here is very bright, you can see everything gets really hot. I just want to, well, I guess this is kind of what would happen in the sun. This is like, I guess, 4 p.m. sun, 3 p.m. sun. It's already very skew and not as intense anymore. And you can see it's actually a bit warmer in the sun because the sunlight is pretty warm, which we get on the left, but then on the shadow side it's pretty blue. So this is kind of pretty close to what we see in the sky. Okay, but first let's reduce the whiteness a tiny bit. And I think the blue was, I still think it's a bit too much, too saturated. Okay, so that helped for sure. And let's play around with the radius a bit. Let's try 0.25. And then for, oh, that was that was too much. You can see now this looks almost like ice now because I accidentally put the scale to 125, which is also very interesting. As you can see, it looks more like rough ice or like silicon or something like that. So I wanted to do that actually. Alright, so and also what I did for the beauty render, I introduced depth of field, and I like to do it in the basic mode. Well, before we do that, let's try one more thing. I'll try to subdivide it 2 times. And let's see if I can actually do that. Sometimes it takes too long, I save, but let's see. Alright, so this is now with the higher subdivision on a value of 2. Let's check the wireframe. You can see it's very dense now, and it depends on the machine. Well, it looks almost like a black shader now, so that's how dense it is. But it adds more detail to it. And you can see we get nicer pings now because there's more detail on the surface. And even if I go just a stop down, you can see how nice it looks. And if you want to have a stronger reflection, you can also break physicality a bit by changing the IOR. Let's just go maybe 0.5 here. And you should see a lot more shiny pings instead of on the 0.3. So this is kind of how you can tweak it for sure. So yeah, I think this is actually pretty neat now. Let's check the shadow side, what we see here. Yeah, I think this helped a lot. We can also just, no, let's not do it on this one. Okay, so for the depth of field, which I like to do actually as well, I render it in the basic mode, and then I select my render camera. I go to the shape, and then in an Arnold tab, we have the depth of field enabled, this focal distance, and then you need to define the distance as well. And to find out the distance, what I tend to do is go into the viewport, look through the SAM camera, create a locator, and then you move the locator where you want it to be in focus. So this is now the distance, so this is 370,982. So I go to the camera, I forgot it already, 300, I think 70,982. Let's just confirm, 982, 370. Yeah, okay, so this would be the focal distance. So let's head over to the hypershade again, or just to this layout here. Update full scene. And then we need to adjust the aperture size. So currently it's on 0, which means there is no depth of field happening. So let's try a value of 5. Let's see what we get. If you hit the play button, it updates. And now you can see that this region is in focus and the rest is blurry. I think it's a bit too much. So let's try maybe 1 to 5. It's about, it just should be a subtle effect. And you can see now this is a bit out of focus. It's not as crazy, but it is, I think this one was a bit more out of focus. Yeah, a lot more. So let's just try maybe 2. And then I like to have aperture blades, and aperture blades, if it's out of focus, you would see like these blades on the, like a bokeh effect on them. So you typically see them around 5 or 6. If you go up to 8, it's almost circular again. So let's just try 8. And then let's change the mode to shaded again. And now let's see how this looks if I... So you can see that this is pretty much out of focus, which is cool. Let's see if we render this region here. We should have a sharp render, which we get. It looks pretty cool for sure. Just for the fun of it, maybe let's just change the focus point. So I'm copying the value just to paste it in a second again. So let's try 50. Interesting. Okay, let's try 150. Okay. The thing is, it's still focused to this point. Oh no, it's actually not. It's actually focused. Where is it focused to? I guess it's out of camera now. Yeah, it's. I thought we would see the bokeh a bit better here. Not sure why we don't see that. Interesting. Anyways, let's just continue. So this is what we want. And for final render settings, it depends if you render with motion blur or if not. Typically, I render with motion blur, so I have higher settings. And again, if you render with depth of field, you should have at least 4 AA samples more than what your high settings are. So for this render, you can see it's pretty clean in the back there. So I went a bit crazy, and I think I had 10 here. I think something like this, and then 4 here. So I'll just render that and be back in a second. So after a bit of rendering, you can see the result, and honestly, I must say it doesn't look like snow anymore. It's more like ice now, but obviously it's still an interesting effect. And if you want to go for ice, I guess just follow this exactly, and you get these almost this molten snow or compressed snowball. And I think the result looks pretty good. So this is now what I wanted to show you, and I guess it should help you guys to just understand how to set up solid scattering shaders or something like that. Yeah, and feel free to send me any renders or leave me feedback if you have any more suggestions. And if you want to get this exact shader, I will upload this to the Patreon site, and if you have the access to the source files, you will get the link on Patreon. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. I would highly appreciate that, especially if we can actually reach 20k subscribers, which is a big milestone for me. Cool. And we're almost there at 40 minutes now, so I think this is long enough for this. And I'm actually creating the snow shader to use in a larger scene, and I'm preparing a nice night lighting tutorial using a snowy environment. And I don't want to spoil too much, but this will be, I guess, my next bigger tutorial. So thanks again for tuning in, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial. Bye.